1 second, let me start everything.
No, two, and we'll call the three elected officials to order for 8:15, and
I can't hear it. 1 second, they're having problems. They can't hear, she said.
It's just not very loud. I'm on my best computer and it's all the way up.
Can you hear me at this?
It's really hard to understand.
Okay.
now.
You joined via owl.
How about now?
Not much change. That room is challenging.
1 second.
How about now?
A little better.
Any better?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Afraid if I back up any further, I'd fall over the cliff. Okay. So you're laughing, Mayor, so I'm sure you heard that. All right, so first item of business, review and approval of the minutes. Anybody have any changes? Or have a motion to approve the minutes or the agenda as presented? Anybody can move to approve the agenda. Thank you, sir.
Second.
Got a motion second to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Have it. And then second item of business is approving the minutes for a March 20 minute meeting. They've also been distributed. They're in your packet. Does anybody have any changes? Otherwise, the chair's open to a motion.
Move to approve the March 20 meeting minutes.
Second. Got a motion and second to approve the minutes for the March 20 meeting. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. The ayes have it. Thank you. So next item of business, the public hearing to take public testimony. Consider and recommend to the Board of County Commissioners the adoption of the initial jurisdictional population allocation for Spokane County planning period of 2026 to 2046. And I'm still going to turn it over to Mr. Allred.
Thank you, Commissioner French. Fella's gonna pull up a PowerPoint for us here. Maybe I should confirm that, am I speaking loud enough for the people online to hear?
Yep.
Folks can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is an item that we're revisiting from the March meeting. At that meeting, Heather and I explained this first round of population allocation for 2046. And I'm here today to revisit that and walk you through how we got to this point. So most of you know that as part of the GMA, we're required to adopt an allocation for population for the 2026 updates to the comprehensive plans. The steering committee of elected officials, this body has asked the PTAC to consider different methods for that population allocation. And to support that, the PTAC formed a subcommittee in 2023 to start investigating the best approach. So after numerous meetings, we have a final recommendation that's been submitted. It's included in the memo you have in front of you. The subcommittee was supported by the folks that you can see on the screen here and many others. So this was truly a collaborative effort that got us to the recommendation that we're making to this body today. So at the time the memo was written, we were making an assumption that the Board of County Commissioners would use the OFM medium population. It's my understanding that that population has since been adopted by the Board of County Commissioners. So what we're talking about here today is how to allocate that 100,000, those 100,000 people to each of the individual jurisdictions, such that the jurisdictions can then develop comp plans to support that growth. So to do that, we sought the simplest, clearest, and most understandable process. We really wanted to keep round one simple. I'm going to talk about a two-round approach here in a minute. But for this first round, we really wanted to keep it simple. I've been kind of thinking about this as part science, part art. This first round you can think of as the science part. The second round that I'm going to describe in more detail later is really the art. And the other goal that we had with this effort is to minimize the amount of manual adjustments necessary. We really wanted to keep it sort of mathematical to reduce the need for arbitrary adjustments. So we thought about three different main ways to do this. We looked at a linear trend-based approach using OFM data. We took a look at SRTC's land use allocation tool. And we also looked at options using US Census data and ACS data using the same linear approach. Each of those had its own strengths and weaknesses. The OFM data was, at the end of the day, was really the most consistent overall. It made it the most practical to develop these trend-based analyses. The SRTC model really is used for a different purpose. There's different geographies involved. There's different horizon year involved. So that really wasn't the best choice either. And the census data, whether it be the decennial census with not enough data points or the ACS with too much variability, really also wasn't the best choice. I mentioned this two-round approach. What we're recommending here today is that this body adopt or make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to adopt the round one allocations, which is the data that you see in the table in your packet. And then later in Q3 or Q4, this body will then reconsider a round two process. And so really round one is meant to allocate that population to jurisdictions with that linear trend that I just described. Ultimately, we'll adjust the 2046 numbers to ensure that the countywide population meets that OFM medium control total, and that work has been done. Those adjustments have been made in the data table that you have. I'll talk more about some hand adjustments that we did have to make and the reasons why we made those. And as I said before, ultimately for round two, after each jurisdiction has done a lot of their preliminary GMA-related planning work, like the land capacity analysis and other required preliminary planning, we'll have the opportunity to come back and refine those numbers, and we'll have better data to use to refine those numbers in round two, and that will come again later. So I mentioned we made some manual adjustments. These we felt necessary to really just sort of meet common sense. 4 of the jurisdictions showed a negative growth after we conducted the trend-based analysis. Those were Fairfield, Latah, Medical Lake, and Spangle. For Fairfield, Latah, and Spangle, we manually adjusted those to 0. We didn't think it made sense out of the gate to assume those communities would be shrinking, so we just set them to 0 for now. Medical Lake was a little bit different. Medical Lake has some institutional population that really becomes tough to forecast for. So what we did in that case is we just used, you can think of it as their raw trend line instead of an adjusted trend line, and went with that sort of modest growth that you see in the table. So I've talked a little bit about round two and what that could look like. Assuming this body supports the recommendation as it's presented in the packet, that data will then go back to the jurisdictions to do that preliminary work that I talked about. In round two, those same jurisdictions can make considerations to refine that data further, things like past growth patterns, infrastructure considerations. There's many new requirements, legislative requirements that are being considered at the PTAC for their impacts. Jurisdictional feedback obviously will go into that. We'll also look at things like proximity to employment. All of that can be considered in this round two exercise. So sort of just some general considerations here. As I mentioned, we found that the OFM population trends are really the most mathematically sound. There were other options that were available to us, but we thought these were the best, so to speak. I've mentioned it many times now, but round two will allow us to make those individual adjustments. And the other important thing to point out here is there's a requirement that we revisit this in 5 years. So assuming we get through the end of the process, we'll be back at this in 5 years, looking at this again to understand and make refinements to that. I'm gonna come back to this table, so don't feel like you've got to soak all this in now if you don't have your packet in front of you, but this is ultimately, what we're recommending in terms of that jurisdictional allocation. Again, based on those, OFM trend lines that I discussed.
Mike?
Yes,
Question for you.
yeah,
When you talk about, coming back in 5 years and taking another look at that, to what depth, is that review going to take place? Because I know that we adopted the original countywide planning policies. We said we'd do it every 5 years until we came to the first 5-year period and realized how much work it is.
yeah,
And then we stretched it to 10. So
yeah.
I'm just wondering, in your assessment, is the 5-year a look at one section of it, or is it a open it up and look at everything?
Well, I don't want to speak for the entire subcommittee, and obviously this body really can decide what that looks like in coordination with the county and their administrative team, but I think that option is really up to this body, what you want that to look like. And I don't know, Scott, if you have anything to add to that, but
Well, generally, our understanding of that 5-year review period is because the plans were now extended to 10, 5-year is a check-in. How are we doing? What adjustments do we need to make to accommodate growth that we didn't anticipate based on the market?
Okay.
But it would be a wide ranging review.
Well, with a wide range of analysis, that means that there's also got to be money to be able to pay for that. And time and resources to be able to do it. And that was part of the challenge we came to in 2006, is there's not enough time and money to do all that work. I mean, even this process is taking us close to 5 years to do.
I certainly can't answer on behalf of our legislative team, but I think that there's at least probably some optimism that since the legislature funded the updates this cycle, that they would continue to do that funding for those updates, but we've heard nothing from Commerce about that on the horizon. To be honest.
So how much will the 5-year check-in play into adjusting, as we'll see later, potential housing requirements?
Significant. It's
So-
it's like a reanalysis every 5 years.
So we may have, when, I assume all of us have read the packet. So we may want to plan for 5-year reviews, so we can 5-year check-ins, so we can keep this beast on a leash.
Well, I'm fine with 5 years, assuming that all the jurisdictions are committed to having the resources necessary to do it, because if we're not all in, somebody falls out, then it's going to hamper the ability for everybody else to finish their work.
I think when we get to method A and method B, this might be another time for you to revisit that question, re-ask that question.
Okay.
Well, if I could just add that this 5-year period is actually tied into some performance requirements of growth management, and that performance will be based on the successful work of individual organizations or agencies in demonstrating in 5 years that they've been able to progress toward meeting those targets. So it's actually going to fall to each agency to do this 5-year update and demonstrate back to the state how well we are trending on being able to accommodate both population and, as we'll talk about later today, the housing. And under the act will be required individually as agencies to readjust if we're not meeting those targets. That's really what this comes down to, is once you make this allocation, then we as agencies individually will own the responsibility moving forward to demonstrate that we're meeting those targets.
100% on board with what you just said. That'd be great.
we just got a couple more slides for you here. I'm sure many of you are interested in comparing this round to when we went through this process the last time. One thing that's important to keep in mind is OFM, the underlying data that supports these trend analyses, has adjusted for the increased growth that our region has seen since the last time we went through this exercise. So the number is already larger. That growth number is already larger. That mid-series is already larger than it was last time. So I think it's not quite an apples to apples comparison to look at the raw number when you look at 2017 to this most recent effort. So what's probably more useful is to look at the share and how the share of growth has changed compared to the last round that we went through. And you can see those numbers indicated on the far right of this table. And they're symbolized based on whether they're higher or lower, that share is higher or lower than it was last time. And we can come back to these tables, if you want. And I'm happy to take any questions. That concludes my presentation.
Questions? Again, my apologies for being late. Any questions from the members of the steering committee? Not seeing any. Yeah, I was gonna do that. So at this time, let us open the public hearing at 9:17 and see if we have, we'll start online. Do we have any questions from anybody in the internet, anybody online for anyone? Any hands up? So we'll come back to that at the end. So do we have anyone in the audience that wishes to provide testimony to the group as part of this public hearing? Second call for public testimony. Third and final call for public testimony from the audience. Anyone online wishing to have comments? Second call. Third call. We have had no comment, no one offering comments or testimony either in person or online. So I will close the public hearing at 9:18 and look to the membership for a recommendation on this first round population forecast and allocation.
I'll make a motion to adopt the staff recommendation.
Is there a second? Second. Moved and seconded. Any discussion from the group? Seeing or hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Sorry. Any opposed? Hearing none opposed, this is the staff recommendation is adopted. Thank you very much. And that brings us to our workshops this afternoon. First is the coordinated water system. Mr. Chesney.
Well, jump on that. You have in your packet a draft interlocal agreement that is based on the consensus we saw at an earlier steering committee meeting, and what we were asking or suggesting at that time is that those of us, the communities that are receiving funding from Commerce to update our comprehensive plans, set aside 5% of that for the update of the water system plan. This draft ILA is the first chance to memorialize that. It puts those amounts in play, are on paper, and we will looking to you for comments and suggestions. And after this meeting, if the steering committee is the consensus is to move forward, we will distribute that to the communities for more detailed review and comment. Happy to take any questions.
So for jurisdictions that don't have their own water systems, how do we work with the purveyors through this agreement?
Well, the funding source coming from Commerce, we tied it back to those communities, but we will be obviously working with all of the purveyors individually to participate in declaring their water systems, their water rights, their ability to serve. It will be a top to bottom review of the plan with all of the providers participating.
Any questions on this for Mr. Chesney? On this agreement, Ms. Klitzky?
Yeah, when the city is looking at funding this, are we going to create an interlocal agreement? I
Yes.
mean, the county, I'm sorry, I said the city.
The draft agreement we're suggesting is in the packet.
Oh, okay.
And then the updated coordinated water system plan would come back to this body for at least review and comment before it is sent around for also for adoption.
Any other comments?
The only thing we're talking about with this agreement is doing the study.
Yes, the only thing this would do is update the coordinated water system.
Oh, so when would we be discussing some of the other details? There's responsibilities in here that the county role, but we'll talk about how we're funding it later. Is that
Well, the funding, was, an earlier steering committee. Suggested that each of the communities that had, funding from Commerce would contribute or set aside 5% of that pool to contribute to the update of this plan. And the detailed review of the ILA, we certainly leave up to the individual cities and towns.
Okay.
And hopefully, ILAs are sometimes time consuming. We will hope that we get the ILA signed before the deadline for approving these things. So, yeah, if there's general agreement, we're hoping that the ILA can be enacted, in the next, 6 months.
Any other questions? Ms. Walter?
So, have the jurisdictions received this funding yet, or is that a July 1
That's the July, these are all the July 1
from
funds.
Congress? Okay. And so is there a timeline by which the county is committing to complete the plan?
Not yet. We're really, there's kind of two schools of thought. One is that the update would be fairly technical, but also fairly straightforward and really wouldn't take a lot of time. But the challenge is always, when you open the hood and look at the engine, do you find something you didn't anticipate? But it would be, in our opinion, it would be a 9 months to 1 year process, probably at the outset, going in parallel with all of our comp plan.
I would ask if any of the potential signatory jurisdictions have any comments for Mr. Chesney, because I would say that because of Millwood's, some current issues in Millwood, this study is gonna be critical. And we've got to commit to this, and we've got to get this going as soon as possible. Because there's gonna be a lot of moving pieces, particularly for jurisdictions or for purveyors that are out of certificated right. We've got to be able to have a platform that we will use to discuss with our state entities as to how we can provide water for the growth that we are expected to handle. And we've got some serious issues in this county as to how to move water around. So if there are questions on this, we need to get this answered up, and I would urge folks to consider and sign this as quickly as possible.
Ron Cockle, City of Spangle Council. My question is if this is the first the City of Spangle's heard anything about this, anything at all. My question is, looking at your chart that you had there, that are you requesting that the City of Spangle contribute $5,000 towards this plan to do what will the City of Spangle receive from that?
I believe Spangle signed on to the county's offer to participate in the climate element of the comprehensive plan. This is kind of a parallel path to that. The 5,000 is simply that 5% allocation out of the commerce funds that would go to Spangle for updating your own planning work. What would we get out of it is the updated coordinated water system plan, which should give your city some confidence and guidance as to, water that's available in that area.
So we've already established our available water source. Now we're in the process of developing a comprehensive plan. And we have zero funding for that. No outside funding for that whatsoever that we've been aware of. None. Therefore, I'm not sure why we're included in this when we have no outside funding source.
We'll go back and review that. We were only intending to allocate funds that were coming from Commerce for the comprehensive planning effort, not separate funding. So we'll go back and review if that was not the case, then you would not have to pay that participation fee, so to speak. And we at the county would work with you as kind of like planning partners to work on your system, learn what you've learned as well.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I was just gonna double down on what you're saying, Mayor, because we just need to get it. This is critical. the water system plan is critical. You had the list of all the things that need to be looked at for round 2 of the, you know, allocations. Well, this is critical, because we gotta know if we have water in certain areas, that's you know, the water rights to back up growth in different areas. So I just would want to make sure we can get it done, so it can inform that second round of population allocations.
On the county side, Rob Lindsay, of our environmental services group, has been working with the purveyors to, you know, give them a heads up of this coming. He will be our project manager, helping us and all of the small towns that really don't have that kind of planning staff to work through. So we're ready to move administratively on this as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Sheffield. So next in the workshop is the countywide planning policies discussion on housing policy.
Why don't I give a start? And perhaps Heather from PTAC may want to participate in this as well. And I'm going to have our Bongo is going to come up and go through this presentation. This is the first cut at moving those allocations by income into the individual communities. PTAC has been working on this. Our team has put together a set of slides, and we'll give the walk through those.
Let's give a little introduction. So hopefully each of you have had your planning staff meet with you in the last couple of weeks or even month about this second leg of our movement towards numbers that we're going to have as targets for comprehensive planning. So the last steering committee, we really talked about that we have a three-legged stool for the basis of doing comprehensive planning in 2026. One is the population allocation by agency. The other is our land capacity analysis that each agency will be doing, and the other is going to be a housing allocation. So what is new for this round is that in addition to giving us population numbers, the state has also given us targets for housing at a countywide level by income level. This is based on an analysis into the future, 20-year future, indicating that we have a significant shortage of housing moving forward, and more importantly, looking at where that housing shortage would fall with regards to people's ability to afford that housing for rental and homeownership opportunities. So as your technical advisory committee, the technical advisory group had put together a subcommittee to begin looking at these housing allocations given to us at the county level by income, and began working with the Department of Commerce because they had developed some models that we could use some formulas that would assist in distributing this housing by agency. And at the end of the day, that's what we're looking at, making recommendation to the PTAC about is that absolutely, at the end of the day, we're making a recommendation to the steering committee with regards to which model that we would recommend that we adopt. Remember, we have to have a really firm target for each agency to work towards in having an individual allocation by jurisdiction of housing numbers is paramount important for us moving forward over the next couple of months. So hopefully today will be a primer for you about this method and be able to see some of the differences between those models, and the county staff has done a great job with the PTAC subcommittee working on some information. Any questions at this point?
Commissioner French.
So, 1990s, early 2000s, HUD came out with some criteria that said that you cannot allocate land area for low-income housing. We wanted it to be intermixed with the rest of the housing inventory in the communities. And in fact, they would withhold funding for low-income housing if in fact you were guilty of engaging in that activity. So has there been any conversation about harmonizing what the state is asking us to do with what HUD allows us to do to be eligible for CDBG funding?
So I would say no, and the reason is that it's each agency's responsibility, once you receive this housing allocation, to identify how to do an equitable and inclusive allocation of these opportunities through your development. So that's the most important thing as well. These are numbers indicating to a number of housing units. We're only creating the opportunity. For most of us in the room, we don't build the housing. We create the regulations that allow for that housing to move forward. So within your own agency's development regulations, which are also required in 6 months of completing our comprehensive plan, that would be where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, to make sure that we're ensuring equitable and fair opportunities or housing choice throughout our community for all income levels.
Just as a matter of introduction, I'm Bongo Thompson. This is Kate Andre. We're County Long Range Planning staff. We're the two gentlemen on the housing element of the comprehensive plan. There we go. Sorry. Second. Okay, so just we kind of want to start off with a bit of a description on the new requirements from the GMA in regards to housing. So this is going to be the most in-depth look we've done at housing on the comprehensive plan level. There's a wide range of new requirements from documented racially discriminatory policies, establishing tenant protections, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're doing here in terms of the housing allocation is we are identifying capacity for housing at different incomes, which will be broken down later, as well as permanent supportive housing and emergency shelters using HAPT, the housing for all planning tool. Yeah, so HAPT, the housing for all planning tool, was developed by the Department of Commerce. It's essentially an Excel sheet that just kind of breaks down. Yes.
Do you in your future slides have a definition of what permanent supportive housing is?
I don't believe so.
Can you quickly define for the group what PSH actually is?
Non-supportive permanent supportive housing is for those individuals transitioning out of homelessness that do not include inclusive services within that facility. It's often intended as a system of up to 1 to 2 years worth of housing to help people begin to develop the resources and the skills in order to live independently in permanent housing. So non-supportive does not mean that they are not in a permanent living situation. It just means that it doesn't include wraparound services as part of that housing option. Permanent supportive housing is for those that would end up in a permanent situation, typically more than 2 years, that could include supportive medical, behavioral health supported services that are integrated within that type of housing. So one is not supported, it's intended as a transition. One is permanent and can include supportive services as part of that housing. And the HAP tool is again housing for all planning tools, so it's just an acronym. So I apologize if we use some planning terminology moving forward, so stop us and we'll be sure to give you additional explanations as we move.
Are there any questions of what permanent supportive housing actually means, or?
I don't have a question, but just to clarify that GMA and state law actually defines permanent supportive housing. So the terms of transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, all that stuff is already defined by state law. There's not a lot of flexibility for jurisdictions to adopt something different.
Thank you, please.
Yeah, so that's what HAPT is, the housing for all planning tool. We have a population allocation, we pop in this Excel sheet and then it breaks it down by housing types essentially. So yeah, that's what HAPT, that's what HAPT does. And then once we get that housing number, essentially jurisdictions need to look and see if they can accommodate it across those income thresholds, which is broken down by 0 to 30, 30, 50, 58, etc. And then how HAP does it. So there are two main methodologies here, which I believe we're going to touch on later in this presentation. Yeah, and then just the one thing I'll note is the total distribution does not differ between A and B. It's just a difference in how they're spread out among the different incomes. And then there is a custom method C, which we can touch on as well. So method A, the difference between method A and B are fairly subtle, so if there are any questions, please feel free to let me know. Method A distributes housing based on projected growth from 2020 to 2046, so it's just looking at that period there. Yeah, and then just a couple notes on that. There has been concern expressed from some jurisdictions about ability to accommodate their distribution of low-income housing. And another notable thing on Method A, Commerce is planning to do an update of Method A, which is expected to release in June. That will split essentially growth in unincorporated county between rural areas in each of the UDAs. So it gets to a greater level of specificity. We're currently using Method A kind of to test our population allocation or housing allocation and our LCAs to see where we're at. Method B, again, this is a subtle difference, but Method B allocates housing based on share of population at the end of 2046. So trying to think of how to best explain this. I guess I should just ask, does that make sense? Should I struggle to think of how to describe this.
One way to think about the differences between method A and method B, and I'll look to the technical experts in the room, is method A, again, is based on a share of population. So as a community grows faster, you're gonna get a greater share of housing. Makes sense, right? In B, it also is based on projected growth, but it allows within the model, within the spreadsheet, which you should have in your packet, that each agency is able to have counted towards that growth, the type of housing by income level that they already have. So it considers the housing that is already there, whereas as A is a straight projection of total housing by income that is needed. The goal of both methods is that the county as a whole has to arrive at the same number of allocated housing units by county, as well as the total number of housing units by income level. So that's where there's flexibility in these methods. So again, A is a projection based on growth. B allows for consideration of existing housing by income type.
So Heather, I have another question. Because we're all electeds here and we like to look at numbers. Do you have a slide in here that shows exactly how these income level buckets are calculated?
The short answer is no. Trying to think how to best explain this. HAPT is sort of a black box. It's the math that does it is not. It's not like a normal Excel sheet in that regard. I mean, I could try to explain it as best I could, but it's not.
I'll go.
Yes.
Let me interrupt for a second. The formulas and methodologies behind method A and method B are locked from Commerce. We can't even see the formulas on how those are allocated.
But what, so we see, so I guess what it is we'll see this sheet, and I'll use Millwood on method A. Method A.
Yes.
Method A, I see that in my 0 to 30%, I need 10 non-PSH and 3 PSH. What is 0 to 30%? What is that income level? I mean, what are we looking at by income level?
So it's area median income, and that generally gets calculated by the census and by Commerce at the state level.
So my understanding is that this area median income level shows that basically this equates to what the cost of that unit should be. Correct?
That's right. So it's based on family size. So if you've done work around any kind of low income development, each year HUD will issue within our local jurisdiction income level guidelines for what is area median income. And then it will identify based on the size of a family, what is the income level for the 80%, the 50%, and the 30% of this. And what that does is it helps us when we look at future housing for rental and homeownership opportunities. It gives us a guidepost in the future as to how much housing that we would have to develop, and that can help us understand things like size, additional supportive services, discounts or incentives that each agency may choose to include in future comprehensive plan development regulations to assist that housing to occur. So, on average, a family of 4 at, I believe, 80, is it, a family of 4 at 50% of area is just under $54,000. And those are federally defined for us. We don't make them up, so we get those numbers annually.
So $54,000 a year.
For a family of 4, but it's scaled, so if you have a larger family, your income level estimated by the federal government may be different versus a family of 1, and please forgive me if I've misquoted what the number is. It's been a couple weeks since I looked at the data on an average.
And it's my understanding that that monthly allocation of that $54,000 can only be 30% of that $54,000.
That's how HUD defines what they expect the maximum for a household to pay for housing costs, including, I believe, utilities is part of that. But yes, those are federally established as well.
So I guess for this group, it would be excellent at some point, or beneficial at some point, if we could get some ideas of what the income levels are, because I would say it's my understanding that the rent, that what is the housing payment, taking the median income and then taking 30% of that median income is in the hundreds of dollar range, correct?
That is correct. And today's a primer for the steering committee to introduce you to the topic. What you're suggesting is excellent. For example, community development department for Spokane County, George Dahl, could prepare and bring forward the next meeting a variety of data for the county of income levels as federally defined, and help us to emphasize what rental target that could mean, as well as homeownership target. So it'll begin to make a little more sense as we start to look at those numbers and what that means realistically moving forward. So excellent question.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm hopefully I'm not putting the cart too much in front of the horse. Commissioner French.
So if you have housing that's dedicated to that income level, and let's say you've got a buyer that is exceeding that income level, can you actually tell that buyer you can't buy this home?
So strictly speaking, if the unit that's developed has contracts with a state or federal agency with income restriction, then it would be that seller or landlord who would tell someone whether or not they could go into that housing. Typically, those contracts reserve that housing for those income groups. As an agency, that would not be part of the conversation we would have with the property. Our role is simply to, once we get these housing numbers, is to create the framework by which a developer, whether they're a nonprofit or for-profit developer, would be able to create the housing that we have in these goals or targets for income.
So I've worked as an architect for a couple developers that tried to target part of their development for an income group, entry-level home buyer. And what happened was that folks that were actually in that mid-market came in, bought at a lower price, and upgraded plastic laminate countertops to granite and hardwood floors to carpet, all that kind of stuff. So if that happens, how are we as an agency held accountable for the actions of the individual homeowner?
I think that's a really good question that we probably would want to have Department of Commerce Housing Group done.
Okay.
And we did ask if there was somebody available today to this overview, and unfortunately there's have been some commitments. We do have Melissa, our Department of Commerce local representative, but we had asked if there was some from the housing group that could come in and get a little bit more of an overview. So hopefully we'll be able to have that maybe in the next presentation.
And I don't need an answer today, but that's a real world example how good intentions can be overturned.
It is a good example, and in our previous topic, which was the population, it's the same experience that we will be having here in a number of years, in 5 years, is having looked at our allocations, having looked at individual agency developing a structure to help facilitate that, to do a check-in and see, are we succeeding or we are not.
So Mr. White and then Mr. Capter.
So when you looked at area median income, do you get down to the level of each city's area median income, or is that just as a county as a whole?
It is available at a local level, is in by census tract and then by block.
Okay, so
level.
this data has based on those cities.
No, the numbers that you saw on the screen were based on, yeah, the cap tool. That is, whatever that represents for an individual agency will be what each agency targets. So it could be slightly different in a city like Liberty Lake, right? Versus Airway Heights.
So it has been factored in, that's what you're
That has not been factored in, that would be for each agency. This is really a tool to assign the specific number of units by income bracket. So it could look different, and that's ultimately when you'll see in the tool, the spreadsheet you have, that you include the comparison sheet that gives the final.
I believe it might be in the packet, it's not in there.
Okay. In your packet is a third sheet that shows the high versus low comparison between method A and method B. And that really is talking about more units or less number of units as we compare A from B as per units. So go ahead.
Mr. Capter.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. One, so just looking at City of Spokane on the B, obviously there's the negative numbers, and you said, are those are gonna be hand massage? Is that what I heard? You said no.
So. There's not one answer, that is an option. Snohomish County did that, and we haven't gotten to method C in the presentation yet, but, just as a brief summary. There's method A and then there's method B, then there's method C, which is essentially anything you can defend. In Snohomish County. They did a method C that was essentially, they took method B and zeroed out all the negatives. That is theoretically something we can do. It's not a prescriptive thing saying if you do B, you have to zero them out or anything like that.
And then ultimately, though, these numbers are the goal that we are reaching by the year 2046. And is it cumulative, as in we've had this number of units that have come online over that time, or is this the number of units that need to be online in the year 2046? Because units can come on and go off and come on and go off, and so I'm wondering, is it a cumulative, or do all those add up, or is it the number of units in place in the year 2046?
I see Kevin, you're raising your hand.
So there's two numbers for each jurisdiction. There's the existing housing, that's an estimate based on certain data. The second number is the new houses that have to be constructed by 2040, or that we should hope to have constructed by 2046. So that's that final additional number.
Okay. And then just the last part of that, emergency housing, how do we know or understand how that was developed? Because obviously there are a million things between now and 2046 that will affect the sheltering and homeless populations. And so I'm not really understanding how they're able to speculate that we'll need 3,000 units in 2046.
Yeah, I mean, there is an amount of, guesswork and projection in all of this. My understanding. I wouldn't bet my life on this, but my understanding is that Commerce has a percentage of total population that they say you need for emergency housing, essentially. I'd have to double check on that. I'm not 100% positive, but I believe it's just a percentage.
Because obviously, there's hopefully ongoing conversations about regional authority and obviously individual things each city is doing. We have a point in time count that gives you actual hard data that you could look at. Was that incorporated into this? I want to understand the specifics.
I'd have to find the specific location, but I believe Commerce does have a projected amount of homeless people that we're supposed to expect in each jurisdiction. And I believe that does play into part of the amount of emergency shelters that we're going to need to plan for. And just to specify, again, this is just changing our zoning to account for all these housing needs. And the way that we can do that with emergency housing is that anything zoned that allows for hotels and motels accounts for, allowing for those emergency shelters. Yeah, as part of the new requirements. So in terms of zoning for what we can take in, and plan for emergency housing, that's one of those zones that can take into account emergency housing needs or projected needs.
So we have Mr. Bowman with a question?
Yes. So the city of Airway Heights, we've taken surveys the last few years to get a game plan together for our. And so we know what the citizens out there. How is this going to affect our current zone? And I know that Heather, you could probably speak to that better than anybody else, but yeah, I just want to know as far as between system A and system B, or each approach, how it's going to affect zoning for us.
Sure. To answer your question, we would have to modify our development regulations to facilitate these types of housing, and hopefully look at a variety of other methods that would help meet those goals. So I'll just give an example where we do have an affordable housing development in Airway Heights, which is Highland Village. It's low income, 30-50% of area median income, and it's both home ownership as well as rental ownership. We participated in the CHIP program from the Department of Commerce, which allowed for the city to waive certain utility connection costs, and those were reimbursed through the grant from the Department of Commerce. That was just one tool that was available to us to help facilitate housing development that was targeting a specific area of housing, and that was in order to help us with relocation goals that we have in Spokane County for people who live in the accident potential zone. For Fairchild was to keep them within our community, move them to safer housing outside of the accident potential zone, but because of those existing housing had income constraints, that is the method we use. So that would be an example of combining both a development standard to allow for smaller lots, smaller units, to look at reductions in parking, look at potential grants to offset connection costs that we developed as a total project to help facilitate that moving forward.
And with bringing that up, the city of Airway Heights wants single family residential a lot. We do have a healthy population for lower income housing. The project with the Highland Village has been absolutely amazing for us, especially with those members living in the APC zone with their Air Force Base. So I just don't want us to be back into a corner. That's the biggest thing with Airway Heights. We don't want to have to do something that is against what our community already wants. So, and that's why we talked about it last night during our city council meeting. We came up with which methodology we would like. But I just wanted to bring that up as far as zoning and everything else. Where is it going to tie our hands, and what can we do about it?
So that's why this was method C.
I think in regards to that question, what exactly, the only control we have, as far as I know, is zoning for all of this. So we're zoning to allow these things, and we're hoping they get built. It doesn't require us to incentivize it. It doesn't require us to, does it?
So part of the affordability ranges, I think we'll touch on that question. So when we have to actually account for our zoning to meet each of these income levels, you can see this is an example of assumptions that relate zoning categories to income levels from Commerce. This is subject to change for each jurisdiction. They can do their own analysis, but as an example, it works. So you can see the assumed affordability level at the end for mid-rise multifamily is assumed to meet that 0 to 80% range. But you can see the market rate for those housings is actually assumed to be 50 to 80. So that 0 to 50% income range has to be met with subsidies or incentives. So part of what each jurisdiction has to do is inventory like their voucher system, and subsidies that exist, and as well as incentives for developers. Do they put in a certain amount of affordable units? If they can build more dense, those sorts of things. And so that takes into account in your inventory. the affordability ranges at that lower income segment.
So are you saying mandatory inclusionary zoning? I have not seen that in state law, so I would
I
like to
don't
know where
think-
that's coming
I don't think it's mandatory. It's more that you happen to take into account current incentives to meet that income level. I think mandating it, I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure how that would work. If it's something you could mandate a jurisdiction.
Most of these
but-
programs are outside of the city. We don't have a slush fund of money for, providing these sorts of incentives and subsidies, so. Curious
Just
where
a-
the
just a
legislature thinks
clarification
it
that
comes.
state law does not require agencies to provide inclusive housing as part of the methodology of each agency to meet these goals. It's purely upon an analysis and review of what each city is capable of with regards to their standards and their programs that they're able to adopt in order to move forward to attempt to entice the right size and the right type of housing that will help meet these needs. So there is no requirement for inclusionary zoning. There is no requirement in the law to include specific incentives. Rather, there are some guidelines about how you can achieve this and some examples throughout the state of how other communities have worked to meet some of these goals. And keep in mind that we're 2026 adopter, but these standards were only adopted in 2023. And so there are some great working examples out there from other communities. This is in part some work that's already in play right now with other communities that are 2025 adopters as we move forward, so we can look to them for some guidance as agencies.
So we have Ms. Klitzky and then we have Mr. White
So
and then Mr. Bump.
I'm still in the previous question, like, the way I'm interpreting the subsidies and no subsidies is if you don't want to have high density zoning, you can try to use subsidies to say that it would make the affordability still able to happen. But if you want to do it without subsidies, you would need to have higher density zoning. It's not forcing any jurisdictions to not have single family, but if you're trying to have single family and it's going to meet some of these affordability requirements, you would have to have some kind of subsidies to make that affordable based on market forces. So like Airway Heights would not be forced to exclude single family residential, but if they don't zone to allow it and they only zone for single family residential, they'd have to have some kind of subsidy system in play to make those affordable. But if you have multifamily zoning and single family zoning, you have enough to meet it the other ways, you wouldn't have to have those subsidies, is what I'm understanding from this. But it's kind of like what they were saying about option C, it's whatever you can justify, right?
So, noted at the bottom here of this slide, this is, as Tate said, the example from Commerce. Jurisdictions can kind of split this up whichever way they like. So it would be up to, Airway Heights, the Valley, the city, whoever, to define, what zone would equal what affordability level. So there's a large amount of local control over that. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
So Mr. White.
I'm just looking at this purely from long term. So if the city says we don't want to do something, of course, it's a state law, so you're gonna be mandated to do it. At some point, you say it's not mandatory, but it's being pushed as this is gonna be a requirement. If the city doesn't do it, then they're gonna get sued because they didn't do it. So I guess that's sort of the, the issue here is that if the cities, so I want to make, it's a point, I guess, that the cities are gonna have to look at it that way, as this is gonna be a requirement, so. So I'm not even gonna factor that into it.
If I could jump in for a second, but add on to that. What what the guys and Heather are talking about is these are the two models that came out from Commerce. They're the first cut at trying to do this based on the legislation that happened in 23. We all are sort of intuitively headed for a model C that we customize for Spokane County. And the goal of this steering committee is to come to a consensus on what that model looks like for those allocations that go out. So the idea that communities can opt in or opt out, you're right, there's not an out. The steering committee will make a recommendation to the county board And the county board by law will be making that allocation, they'll make that firm allocation based on the recommendations to this group. But it's our intention with our PTAC representing all of us to work through those local issues as best we can and bring something back here for a general consensus. It may not be something that would be a unanimous choice, but it will, as long as it reaches a consensus that all of you are comfortable with in making that recommendation, that'll be our tipping point. Mr. Bowman.
All right, Airway Heights does not have any more properties that are zoned for apartment complexes, 0. There's none out there. So with that being said, what are we gonna be forced into? When we took, I mean, and we have worked very hard with our community and gotten a lot of community involvement and engagement throughout the years to see, hey, what is the view of the city? What's our identity? Who do we want to be? Are we just, a flow through for Fairchild? Who do we want to be? So with that being said, we've taken into consideration quite a bit of that feedback from the community to develop within the last couple of years what we've developed. And I just don't want it to tie our hands. That's the only thing that came out of last night's city council meeting is what corner is this going to back us into? And because method A and method B, if you look at, what we're going to be required as far as the higher lower is concerned on the third, we're going to be required a lot for the 0 to 30 and 30 to 50. And with option B, we would be, allowed much higher within those upper ranges for the single family home. So for us, option B works. But that may not be the consensus across the county as a whole. So I'd love to see a hybrid model to where we can kind of dictate and see, because I just don't want us to be forced into anything that A, the community wants, B, something that we're not planned for, we don't have zoning for, we don't have the property for. Because we're tied, you gotta think. We have 2 Indian tribes with tribal trust property. One with 300 acres right in the middle of our city. We have Fairchild Air Force Base, we have Spokane City, and we have, boundary issues. We have water issues, we have a lot going on. So this is all in consideration for the city of Airway Heights that we're asking this group to take into consideration.
Mr. Cathcart.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I understand the local control concerns and all of that, and with respect, I think it's just challenging. We have, because of state mandates, we have a finite amount of land that can be built on. We have an urban growth boundary, and when certain jurisdictions don't necessarily build, and I don't know the stocks, this isn't necessarily specific to Airway Heights, but when certain jurisdictions don't necessarily build a lot of multifamily and housing, then that puts the onus on everybody else in the community to take that on. And that's the challenge we face, since we can't, reasonably expand the UGA as necessary. We can't reasonably accommodate a lot of these things. We're forced into this situation where jurisdictions, because of the state mandates, have to take on these greater shares, and that's just GMA, and that's unfortunate, but that's where we're at.
So I just spoke with Mr. Chesney, and I think one of the things that, and I'd like to let these people continue on. I think one of the things is that at our next PTAC, at our next meeting here, we're gonna try and find somebody who can come in and clearly speak to, from the legislative perspective, what our duties are as municipalities to make this. And that means basically a consideration of, and for the smaller jurisdictions, do we have to rezone? Are we gonna have to bite the bullet and rezone? Because the other thing that's out there is this ADU thing, which I would like somebody to explain what the new ADU regulations are gonna look like for all of us. Because it looks like you can put whatever you want, up to 4 of them on your property with no restrictions. So I think there's a lot of stuff at play, but ask Scott kindly to have somebody come in and really explain to this group with these numbers, what that means at the end of the day for, as you're talking about, local identity. So one more to Mr. Cathcart, and then I'd like to let these folks continue.
Just one more, if we're gonna consider a C, I mean, I just think there should be some, if commerce allows it, and I just don't know, but there should be some consideration and thoughtfulness around homeownership aspects. Because obviously with like the moderate density, that creates a lot of opportunity for home ownership, which creates a whole other level of support for community members who otherwise wouldn't have access. And so I think thinking holistically about not just housing, but creating opportunities for ownership in different jurisdictions is important as well.
All right, so please.
So the next thing that we've been talking about in PTAC is the role of the countywide planning policies. We sort of landed that we do need to update the countywide planning policies to start accounting for the new affordability requirements. And this will ultimately guide, the implementation of the chosen housing allocation method. Just to go over potential topics, this time around is things specific to the housing allocation. We've talked a lot about establishing desired growth patterns while accounting for essential services to address all our housing needs, diversifying housing stock, and planning for accommodating all those income segments. Other topics that don't relate directly to the housing allocation, but would give us a jump start on the other requirements would be policies identifying and undoing those racially disparate impacts. Policies talking about preservation of existing housing stock and coordinating our regional efforts and monitoring our housing development. And this is just an example of a countywide planning policy. We've looked a lot into other counties and see what they have done on the west side of how they've incorporated these new ones. So it's essentially addressing some of the stuff we've talked about in DTAC about strategies for development patterns, increasing opportunity and capacity for housing, and supporting those additional housing types. Again, this isn't an adopted or even recommended countywide planning policy, but it's just an example of something we could see going forward.
So we have a question for Mr. French. If you could back up one slide. So this, and I know that in the city's comp plan, this is probably more of a problem than it is in some of the others. But this preservation of existing affordable housing stock, you know, as we look at BOCA and the idea of increasing density on existing lots, that's counter to that policy. And so I just, you know, are we going to try and reconcile that difference about increasing density on lots that are inside the boundary?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It is kind of a tricky thing, you know, when you have this lot and one thing saying you want to increase the density and one thing saying you want to keep this. I understand that kind of the juxtaposition there. We don't have a great answer for that right now. It's something we're looking into in terms of how we can, you know, increase density to meet the housing allocation requirements while also doing preservation. We're still very in the early stages, especially on preservation. We're still very early on. So apologies, I don't have a great answer for that, but it's something we're aware of and something we're starting to get into.
Yeah, I don't know how you would. I mean, the city's been 25 years and you haven't addressed that yet. It's a challenge. You're either going to re-gentrify some of the neighborhoods or you're not. And so I don't know how you reconcile those two.
Well, I think it could also just refer to, if you do have affordable units, making sure that they can stay affordable, like, you know, we often get asked to renew with different partners. Housing authority, the affordable housing stock that we actually do have, right, like apartments and some single family homes, but I think it could refer to either single family or, you know, low income people living in their own single family home, or it could be subsidized units, right, in our community. So it's a challenge, but you want to continue to make sure those units stay there. And I know we get asked a lot of times to put our affordable housing dollars back into preserving the units that we do have so that they can stay affordable for like another 20 years.
But you've got a property owner that has a single family home that's functionally obsolescent, wants to increase the density from 1 to 4. Highest and best use for that property is to go to 4 units. And yet you've got a policy that says you can't do that. And so, you know, there becomes the challenge for the property owner that says, hey, I want to increase the value of the property and increase housing in my community, but I can't get rid of the old. I'm not advocating one side or the
No, no, I
other,
know
I'm
what
just
you're saying.
pointing out.
I think you have current
this is
property
a
owners, and then
really-
you have future.
I
Yeah,
don't.
this is a
think
real
that-
challenge for the development community, or even, not even the development community, just, mom and pop passes away, you get goes to the kids want to increase the value of the property, and they're stuck.
So Ms. Kwitsky and then
Yeah.
Soldier on.
I don't think it requires us to preserve existing as it is affordable housing. I think it requires us to preserve the number of units. So if a house did, or a lot did get redeveloped to 4 units, or even in some of our areas, lots could get redeveloped to much higher densities, it doesn't mean that those units are not going to be affordable. And we also have restrictive covenants on some of our affordable housing that it can't be converted to not affordable housing. But those are usually the more dense ones. But increased density on a newly developed lot doesn't mean that it's going to become suddenly the price of a brand new single family home. So I think that actually Spokane sets us up pretty well to continue to have affordable housing.
Please.
Yeah, this is just gonna look very different for each jurisdiction moving forward. So an example, actually, using the city of Millwood and the new accessory dwelling unit requirements is that it envisions an opportunity to create affordable housing by allowing for a smaller unit to be developed on the same lot, and the law requires that that unit be allowed to be divided off. So what that means is that there are a variety of strategies we can recognize through the county planning policies that these can achieve keeping existing affordable housing in place. And then individually as agencies, we might think of other ways to carry out that implementation as we move forward, and everyone at the table has spoken to their own experience and is true. Just to validate that there are a variety of ways, which include investing our community development dollars back into existing affordable subsidized housing projects so that the term is extended beyond the initial 15, 20, or 25 years, as well as ways in which we can look at total number of units that would be affordable in the future through the development regulations. These are all valid. And again, these are good questions. And so when we come back to the steering committee, we will ask for some additional staff from the Department of Commerce as well as from community development departments to come in, maybe speak to some of these questions at the basis of how the homeless numbers are accounted for, how the income levels were accounted for, what might we be looking for in the future with regards to policies to meet these goals. And we can all agree, I think that these are goals that we should be working toward as a community, because we don't want to look at displacement always, but for example, in Airway Heights, we have factors that their own safety displacement is a goal in order to put them in safer and affordable housing at the same time. So again, it could look different, but we could bring some people in to speak to how this may be occurring in other communities to give you a broader vision of what this means before being asked to make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners on these applications. So just real quickly, this is a primer. There's 3 methods available to us. We talked about A and B. C is potentially developing our own methodology. We just have to defend that. And that's why you have the numbers to see what those look like and what it could mean. And I would just encourage you to think about all sizes of community when you look at these numbers. Millwood, Deer Park, Medical Lake, they're not all going to be on the same field moving forward with the ability to provide housing. And things that we're talking about at the PTAC could be, what if we started looking at a method C where we're looking at transit as being a critical factor with allocation of numbers? How reasonable is it to expect when we're looking at 50% or less of AMI that someone's going to go live someplace where it's a 30-minute drive? How affordable is that going to be? It needs to be in every community, but maybe those are some guidance we would appreciate from the steering committee as the PTAC works forward on some recommendations.
Yeah, just to clarify, we have some significant areas, just 5 minutes from Spokane that has no bus service. So well inside the city, inside the PTBA, inside the UGA, no service. So I think that'd be a challenging one.
I agree, and as we look in the whole at the GMA, we also have requirements to move toward multimodal, so. Thinking about walking and biking radius, to employment or service areas, so I think these cannot be solved today, but there are things that we think about individually as communities to help us, develop our own method for how we would address housing demand in this 20-year future.
Ms. Klitzky.
You know, if we're allowed to consider future transit development, like if it's in an adopted plan, if we do that kind of.
Yes, we can do a methodology C. There's no guides other than total population, total housing allocation has to be achieved, through all the numbers put together by each agency, and it has to also meet by the total housing by income group as well. So we can certainly use transit planning as a significant factor in thinking about how we distribute these numbers in the future.
Mr. Bowman, and then Mr. Hadley.
So I think the biggest goal that we should have is how do we distribute between each population and not tie the hands of one? Because if we can't do something, is that going to put it on the city of Spokane? Is that going to put it in an unincorporated county? How can we do this? Because my hands are tied, especially for flight pass and a lot of other things that I have to take into consideration, especially am I trying to grow up or out, or what are we trying to do? So I think that we would just ask that, how are we going to take into consideration all of us as a whole?
Mr. Hadley.
It's kind of dovetail on that. I grew up in Spokane Valley and I've obviously seen a lot of changes over the years. It is almost completely rural for many, many years. We have a problem with identity. I was talking to Mr. White about this, that people can't decide, are we rural, are we a city, or we have infill, do we not? So those are really challenging for our staff. So I think any method we look at, we need to choose the easiest method, whether it be a hybrid or whatever, to make it easiest for our staff to meet zoning requirements. And I think we're all facing those challenges. You know, we have people that, you know, they're against infill because we traditionally have larger lots or older neighborhoods. And that's all throughout the whole city. And that's really a challenge. Do you develop on those? Do you build on one home? As Mr. Credit said about you inherit your family house or something like that. Can you build on that? It'd be great for infill. It's the best use of that with the infrastructure. So I think rezoning for our staff of our municipalities, so what we can do is make it easier for them to meet those requirements.
Thank you. So let's continue on. I want to be conscious of people's time.
That was essentially all we had after this. Oh, that's a good question. Just regarding countywide planning policies, going forward, that's our next step in PCAP is start drafting and talking about what we want those CPPs to look like. Yeah.
It does sound like from the group that we would like to consider a method C. So I would ask that the recommendation, or I would think that we would want a recommendation to go to the PTAC to develop a method C that kind of plays off some of the concerns we've heard here, and ability to share amongst jurisdictions in the county, distribute some of the load, et cetera, and come back with some ideas on that. I don't think that, I think that there are some individual jurisdictions that like method A. I know that there are some jurisdictions that like method B. I don't think it works well for, I think we need to find that way. Is there anybody who is not in favor of developing a method C?
Do you need a motion? So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Yes, Mr. Gaffney?
What's the timeline for adopting A, B, or C?
We are anticipating, certainly by the end of the year, Q4.
Okay.
Because we've got to have some clear direction as all of us are putting together the guts of our plan updates, and we need to use all of 25 for that.
Because it just seems like this could be a challenging thing to come up with. And so the more communication in advance of these meetings, of rough drafts and things like that, the better for me. So I have some understanding going into the meeting.
We completely understand that. The purpose of today, as Heather pointed out, was as a primer. It's like, here, this is the first time we've cranked through these numbers as planning staff, looking for guidance and direction, which we received. And we will take that back to the talented team of planners that works for all of you.
I would just say that all of us here have representatives on PTAC, I would assume, or in some way. We as jurisdictions need to take that upon ourselves to meet with our own PTAC representatives and get downloads from them as they've come out of their technical meetings. So, yes, it would be great if we could, as a body, distribute information here, but we all have a duty ourselves to meet with our own planning staff to get educated up. Mr. Brent.
In the past, when we have amended or changed the countywide planning policies, that's always been done with the subcommittee and the steering committee of elected officials. Do we want to go back to that model, or do we want to leave it to PTAC to make recommendations and come forward with?
I can clarify one part of that. PTAC has also created a subcommittee for the housing allocation. But if a subgroup of the steering committee wished to do the same and wanted to meet separately, we would be happy to serve them.
I'm not thinking about meeting separately, I'm thinking about meeting concurrently with staff. So that, you know, all of their work is somehow influenced by the steering committee, so that when it comes here, you know, at least there's been some input.
Understood. I meant separately from the
Yeah.
group as a whole.
Okay. But just an observation.
I was just gonna say, I'm certainly open to that. I was just gonna say, maybe we get a rough draft kind of first, and then that subcommittee could meet to kind of craft something.
We can do that.
I think the staff's very important. I'm not the expert, staff here, they are, I should say, and I'd like to see some information, recommendations.
Yeah.
So,
Could I
oh,
just
good, sorry.
No, I was just gonna ask, you had like some draft language up there for the countywide planning policies. Is that the extent of what you're looking at, a couple paragraphs that need to be adjusted in our countywide plan, or are you looking at more than that?
I think we're wide open.
I just didn't know the extent of the
Right.
update.
When this group went through and updated those planning policies in 21 and 22, we went top to bottom and deliberately left off housing because we saw what the legislature was doing and saying, we will have to get back to this later.
Okay.
So we consider that to be an open-ended question. That was just some suggested language that we would bring back for your consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to participate with staff in discussing that. I think, you know, it's just, we're gonna have to tie this all into the transportation planning. Because where you have different types of housing, you've got to have appropriate transportation. And, you know, we know STA is in the middle of doing a 10-year update, and, you know, SRTC has some information that's updated as well. So I think that's kind of like the employment and the transportation pieces are critical for understanding how we might want to develop a seat.
And I think PTAC is clearly on that same path. And just a quick point of order. On the county side, we've engaged with STA recently to talk about how we better meld their sort of separate planning process with the actual comprehensive plan because of that very issue.
Because they kind of follow what the comp plan puts forward, but yet we're doing this at the same time.
Right, so Carl has committed STA to come into that tent, so to speak.
And I would remind folks that while we think of transportation and schools, et cetera, that water system plan is gonna be huge on where we can put people. Mr. French.
Last observation question, really, the population allocations that have given in this presentation, I should have asked it earlier, but just came to me. Was that influenced by the city's current moratorium conversation, or was that population allocation prior to the conversation about moratorium? And if they do the moratorium, does that influence that number or not?
No, it's the number, it comes from the OFM number, and
Okay.
we've committed to bind ourselves to that number because it's defensible.
Okay. Defensible but not achievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's not achievable, then you shift that population somewhere else. Otherwise, as a county, we're gonna miss a goal.
Mr. Cap.
Yeah,
Mr. Capner.
100%. I mean, I think there should be a full-on look at the entire Lake Tahoe Grandview area and see where can we pull out, because clearly a moratorium is gonna do a lot of damage to housing across the county.
Yeah.
This is
what-
Council Member Dillon. I'm just gonna jump in here and kind of push back on that. I mean, if we want to talk moratorium, we can. It's again vested properties, applications that have been counter complete. We have a large pipeline of projects already underway. Sorry about my 1-year-old here chiming in too. Yeah, we have projects that are counter complete. They're going in under the next 3 to 5 years. Yeah, I know this is something we can talk about more later.
I would just one last thing. I would just say, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity actually to free up space there for other growth in other areas where there isn't astronomical infrastructure needs and costs and things like that. And so it should just be a part of this process, moratorium or not. There's going to continue to be the push for these kinds of things in that area.
Yeah, but if I could, that's an excellent point, because in the past, I don't think any of us really linked our capital facilities plans to our comprehensive plans as directly as GMA makes us do. And that's something the county has kind of right-sized over these last few years. But there's a two-part side of that. We simply cannot grow into areas that are not supported by our capital facilities plan over a 5 or 6 to 20 year period. Correspondingly, if the capital facilities are not there, our urban growth areas must be adjusted downwards so that we can in fact grow into the areas appropriately. So it's a huge risk. If you can't get somewhere with infrastructure, that part of your UGA is going to shrink. It's going to go away.
And luckily for us, that's a city of Spokane problem.
Well, our problem is they don't, because we got.
I understand that, but I think they need to figure that one out themselves. So first, so moving on, any other questions for the crew that's up here right now? Mr. White.
I was just looking, this is just more public participation process in this, how do we engage? So you're looking at all these things, and I appreciate the planners in the room, and I appreciate you guys as elected officials represent all the individuals, so I'm not dismissing that at all. But are we engaging the housing providers from the low incomes of subsidized housing providers? Because if this isn't realistic all the way to the for-profit providers, how are we getting that input from those, especially specific to this? We're talking about housing right now, but this is how are we engaging them early in this process, because are these viable from a perspective of those individuals who are providing that housing?
Joel, we will be. This was the first step to.
No, I know it's very early. I'm just trying to get an idea. We get too far down a path. There's been a lot of money.
Yeah, the county board is about to receive the formal public participation plan that then binds, in addition to the steering committee. That's our public participation plan going forward. That anticipates a series of technical committees or advisory committees. Large ones would be housing. Frankly, you and I will have to sit down and kind of work through where your members are, but we'll be doing that with George and the community development team as well. So that's an upcoming step here in the next quarter.
So I would say that, Mr. White, as many of your membership that you can.
So I'm saying we don't provide, most of my members don't touch subsidized affordable housing. They don't. So there's a lot, huge group is not my members. My members are the for-profit builders. They're not touching these projects. So yeah.
So I guess if
if this is about, we had a lot of discussion about for-profit or for the subsidized housing, then so that we have representatives here. I think
we're going to cast a broad net.
Yeah, excellent habitats.
All right, so I'm gonna take the chair's prerogative. It looks like we have blended the countywide planning policy and the housing allocation alternatives into one giant discussion. So we will move on from there to the tribal participation workshop.
I thought I ordered my police today. Why would you have uncomfortable? Why would I have $1 deal? Well, thank you very much. This is a part of an ongoing conversation with the steering committee of elected officials with regards to tribal participation, just to remind everybody there, has been the,
Heather? Sorry, thank you.
am I really that short?
It's just the directional line, we got to speak directly into it.
5'7". Almost as tall as me.
Yeah, you need taller.
Thank you, Heather Trotman, City of Fairway Heights, Chair of PTAC. Thank you very much. This is part of the request with regards to tribal participation in the steering committee of elected officials. Just a reminder, Growth Management Act was modified and recognizes the importance of tribal participation in local planning, and as part of that, the steering committee sought to extend informational requests to both the Spokane Tribe of Indians and the Kalispell Tribe of Indians of their preferences with regards to participating in the steering committee, as well as if they did participate, what role they would like to have, including voting rights, you know, who they would identify potentially through their representative. We met, including with county representation and department representation, and the tribal liaison for the Department of Commerce with both tribes to do a little bit of background on growth management in the 2026 periodic update, as well as the roles of the steering committee of elected officials and the PTAC, and ask them what their preferences were. Both tribes have responded. We do have Megan Heller today with the Kalispell Tribe of Indians, who has submitted a letter of intent to participate with the steering committee of elected officials. And I was just also in meetings with Francis Sijon with the Spokane Tribe of Indians, and he apologizes. He was planning to be here today, but he is meeting with tribal council and has asked me to convey the wishes of the Spokane Tribe of Indians as well. So with that, Megan, do you want to come up and speak a little bit to the Kalispell Tribe's preferences?
Hello, my name is Megan Heller. I am a Kalispell tribal member as well as the planning manager for the Airway Heights property out that the tribe owns. And we have met with our tribal council to go over the process of both the PTAC as well as this committee to about the impacts of the GMA to our properties within the Spokane County. And with that information, that we have elected to participate in both of these, to be able to collaborate with all of you to help our community move forward. Anybody have any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Megan. I apologize. You're right on the spot. So, yeah. Were there questions for Megan for her Kalispell participation?
Any questions for Megan?
No, good board.
So-
Great to have you.
So I was going to make a motion before Kevin left. So I will frame a motion if somebody else wants to make it. Chair would be open to a motion to open up the interlocal agreement for the addition of both the Spokane tribe and the Kalispell tribe as voting members of the steering committee of elected officials. So if anybody wanted to make that well articulated motion.
I'll also move.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to have opportunity, Francis Sijon had this morning, and so the Spokane tribe is wanting full participation with the steering committee of elected officials and looks forward to that participation, and I apologize for the conflict.
Okay, I think that's consistent with the motion. So all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. So, this staff can go ahead and prepare proposed language, and then we can bring it back to our next meeting.
Yes, but the next item on your agenda is, we would also ask that this group form a small subcommittee to help guide that, because this will be an amendment to the original interlocal agreement from 1991.
Okay.
And we'd like to, we think it's appropriate for the steering committee members to participate in that drafting.
And then, Mr. Frank, we also had a motion on the table before for vision of going to an option C. Oh, if I remember correctly.
Oh, we didn't vote on that?
I don't think we did.
I don't think we did.
Well, that was Kevin's fault. That was his fault before he left. Thank you, Mr. Bowman, for pointing that out.
From staff perspective, if you choose to go ahead with the motion, that's fine. We're clearly aware that the group wants to pursue a method C, and we will be doing that, but you're welcome to make it a formal motion if you.
Well, I think we've already got a motion on the floor and a second. So, why don't we go ahead and vote on that motion? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? The ayes have it. So you've got both of those motions taken in place. Now, who would like to serve on the advisory committee to work with them on proposed language change for the interlocal agreement?
And if, you can let us know of that interest if it's not totally apparent today, and we'll convene that group.
Okay.
If there's interest today, so much better.
So, so the chair has returned and we will advise him of all the work we've assigned to him.
Awesome. It won't get done.
Everything we've accomplished.
That won't get done. So do we need are we making a motion on this?
We already did, we
Okay.
voted on it.
Awesome. Anything
We
else?
voted on option C too.
Awesome.
So,
Look at getting stuff done.
The vice chair was asking for interest in serving on a subcommittee to update the island.
I'm going to have to decline.
I'd be more than happy to serve on the way through for. Tim.
Yeah, I can, I just don't know the time commitment, so.
Yeah, I would like to know the time commitments, but I would be interested as well.
If there's a call an option.
That's fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
we'll start with that.
all right. Here.
All right, so we did the UGA map?
No.
Okay, so we're on to the UGA map.
It was requested that we provide a map of the current urban growth areas. We have one in your packet as well as one on the screen that includes both the designation as UGAs as well as the joint planning areas. And then we've also indicated the urban reserve zoning, which is where our predecessors anticipated studying for future growth in 2001. And so typically those are the first target areas that we will be looking at with PTAC for growth in the metro core. As the groups are completing their land capacity analysis over the next quarter or two, that will also inform us of the adequacy of our urban growth area total acreage. And our PTAC will be working to bring back to you some recommendations probably by the end of the year as to balancing the urban growth area acreage as it now stands with the population and forecasting numbers for the future. But this is where it stands now. We're also happy to provide this electronically if somebody would like to look at it in more detail.
It's online as well.
It's on our web.
Any questions for Mr. Chesney on the UGA map? All right, oh, Ms. Quincy.
Is there an island of urban reserve up in the north? With no
It looks
city
like it.
next to it? What was the plan for that?
There's an area, we just kind of refer to as North Mead, that was urbanizing, as GMA was being contemplated. And it converted its underlying comp plan designation as a land, but it had existing urban zoning pre-GMA and that converted to the contemporary zoning that we have now. So some of that is commercial, some of it's light industrial, some of it's residential. That's an area that we're working with Commerce to create. We're going to create a place and draw a separate UGA boundary around that, like a Cheney, for example, because it was left out of the urban growth area in the past, and it's also one of the areas that was contentious in the future wide settlement in 2013, 2016. So we're going to fix that so that it can be more adequately served with urban services. I should say it's our intention to bring that to your recommendation to you to bring that into an urban category for the future.
Gonna give you an idea where it's at Mountainside Middle School. It's kind of right in the middle of it.
That one that has its own sewage treatment plant, or is that? do you know that?
The county sewer does extend into that area. And Right now, there's a new, North 40 being proposed in that area, a big box store. There's already existing North 40 in the area, so it's an already urbanized area, but it's or wherever, however it happened in the past, it was never included in an urban growth area boundary per se. So it exists, and we're gonna try to bring that into the system, working with Commerce to bring that recommendation back to you.
And I can't really visualize in my head, but to the south or to the west, there's not anything that would make sense to just sort of link it to the existing.
The challenge that you will hear about later this year is everything that, if we need to grow the urban reserve or grow the urban growth area in certain places, we have to account for all of the acreage that's currently in an urban reserve area, but is zoned rural. And that's predominantly the acreages around Airway Heights, Medical Lake, Cheney, at Deer Park, for example. All of that acreage has to be accounted for before we link something up. It would be ideal to actually link it, but the analysis will tell us whether or not that area can grow. The likelihood of it being a good candidate for study is high because a lot of the infrastructure is right there. So it will be in that mix for study.
Any other questions? So that completes our, no other questions, that completes our workshop for today. And that brings us to our period for public comment. Is there anybody in the audience or online who would like to make a comment to the steering committee today?
Well, here.
Yeah, one gentleman. Mr. Johnson, please.
Thank you all, for everything you do, just state that, you do a lot of work with a lot of folks around the table on protecting Fairchild Air Force Base. That's an ability for the Air Force to use that for now and in the future, so I appreciate everybody that's been working on that. Airway Heights, especially with the mayor and city council, they have a very good plan of taking care of keeping development that's compatible where it needs to be. As we look forward to, as you're looking forward to the future growth, just realize the West Plain developments is going crazy. And there's two very large airports out there, and the area between the two large airports is pretty much light industrial. We've been having some pressure lately in discussions about where compatible housing could go. And there's really not a whole lot of space there around those airports, but anything south of I-90 is certainly doesn't affect either airport. But also for Airway Heights, we have a perfect example of this nice little box that's Airway Heights that they can't develop because of where they are related to the base. So to Mayor Sid's point, there are some areas that we looked at, both Spokane International and us, and found an area that's to the east of Hayford that can hold 150 plus houses in a trade for what's in Airway Heights, which is the RV park. And what stopped that was a policy of where the water line is, whose jurisdiction is. So as we move forward and you're taking a look at this in the urban growth area, you open this up, that's a perfect area to put a whole bunch of houses, make Airway Heights a little bit better because they have some place to go. But I just want to point that out because Airway Heights has done a great job of taking care of us. So thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment from the audience? Any public comment online?
No raised hands.
So we will close the public comment period. Ms. Walbert.
Oh, I was just gonna ask about upcoming public meetings. I had seen on the county planning website that there might be some initial outreach to the community about different chapters of the comp plan. So I was just wondering if I could get an update on that.
Yes, starting May 20th. Planning will be going out to five or seven locations to essentially kick off the 2026 update. We'll be going through what the comprehensive plan means, what the GMA requirements are, setting out some public participation opportunities. It's really an intro meeting to what will happen over the next 2.5 years. So I think there's 7 of those that we're doing throughout the town.
Should those get sent out to the steering committee? or just we're.
No, why do we want you to know about that?
I just wonder if anyone will know, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, we're beginning to publicize them now.
Okay.
We have put up old fashioned flyers in each of those locations. We've asked them to distribute it. If they've got a mailing list in each of the libraries, for example. And we will be publicizing the fact they've been legally noticed. We'll be getting out more publicity. And as an aside, we at the county are working to bring on a communications person to work exclusively on the comprehensive plan for the next couple of years to help manage that outreach and public participation process. Because we as planners are not always as skilled at that as somebody that's been in the public relations and communications business. So we're going to bring that on here in the next couple of months.
Ms. Klitzky.
Are you using a consultant to run those, like participation or in informative workshops, or are you doing those in-house?
So,
Are you using a consultant to coordinate that,
yes,
and then you're hiring a communications person?
yes, we're looking at professional subject matter experts to help with our overall general planning work, to augment our staff. Also a second consultant who works exclusively on the climate resiliency element. And one of those will also translate into updating the full environmental impact statement, which is yet another parallel path to what we'll be doing. So we'll have those professional services online, and then a consultant that will be our communications person, working essentially for us, but also as part of our county communications team as well.
Will they be giving us presentations eventually? Maybe?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you.
But you were asking about the public meetings coming up, if there was a consultant, is that what you were asking?
Oh, this first series of meetings, no, that person is not likely to be on board, so we'll be doing those just as planned instead.
Any other comments? With no other comments, do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your participation today. Thank you.
Good luck.
It's funny, I was sad to stop.
It is, I get to hear the one, so I'm more interested in, but I've got to get my continuing ed.